What do you make of the mobilization so far?
Well, as I was saying, I'm actually quite encouraged by it. Okay, I think that there's a great convergence around this issue of Galamsey and the ways in which we must move forward as a country to solve it. I was impressed by the fortitude and the determination of all the young people who mobilized either the Democracy Hub or under the protest movement to free the Democracy Hub protesters. I was very much impressed by that. Okay, I think there were some unfortunate incidents, but that happens. People are relearning the skills of mass demonstration and so on, and we are bound to make some mistakes, and those mistakes can be corrected, and can be corrected in a spirit that opens up space for democracy rather than crushing it, which is what we have seen in terms of the state response. But beyond that, I think the move made by organized labor is hugely significant because at this point, we are talking not just about CSOs and angry youth and so on. We are talking about the people whose labor, whose organized production makes the society function. We are talking about the people who have the capacity, simply by laying down their tools for a day, of forcing government to focus on what we think is important and to begin a dialogue about how we can collectively solve this problem. Not just make it a media sensation, but actually recognize the seriousness of the disaster that we confront as a country and begin to do something. Not just make this a tool of political party campaigns, but actually begin to force a citizen solution, which necessarily at some point encompasses the energies and etc. of the political parties, but essentially a citizens' movement. So I'm very hopeful.
Okay, let me pick on one bit of what you said. Then I'll come to who you think should, how this citizens movement, because right now it looks like there are separate groups working separately. Who should take the lead in putting together the citizens movement? But before that, you said something about dealing with, you said there are lessons being learned from, I think, the Fix the Country demonstration. You said the state needs to deal with that by opening up the space rather than crashing it. What do you mean by that? Exactly what do you expect from the state?
Well, I think that the people who were arrested in the Democracy Hub, I don't know the individuals, of course, except Oliver, who I know. There were some incidents. What concerns us in SMG particularly is the people who were denied access to 37 Hospital during the process. I think that kind of behavior should not be encouraged. What I'm saying is that the police have the capacity to resolve that kind of problem without turning it into a month-long drama, courts, etc. I don't think it is normal to arrest demonstrators in this kind of circumstance and keep them in jail for God knows how many days before you present them to judges and then bang them back up, on remand for another 2 weeks before you hear them, and it's still dragging on. These were slight, tap on the wrist matters, okay? So I think that the state can respond to any perceived unruliness without appearing to be opposed to the expression of opinion, to the organization of demonstrations around matters which are of crucial national interest. People were not, engaged on a lark. This was not an act of, unruly youth enjoying themselves in the streets. We face a crisis. Everybody in this country faces a crisis. It is beginning to break now, but it will break in earnest next year. And we are late. At least people are trying to do something now. Okay, your response should not be to lock them up, because the message you send is that you're more interested in intimidating people who express dissent than encouraging citizens to work together to solve problems. And that's a dangerous thing for a democracy, especially a young democracy like ours.
And you talked about facing a crisis. What do you think is the crisis here? Are we discussing the main issues, or are we missing the point, from your opinion?
Well, there are several levels of the crisis. There's Galamsey itself and the damage it is doing to our water systems, which feed into our food systems, and which mean that we are either going to be spending huge amounts of money buying new kinds of chemicals and so on to clean the water we drink and cook with, and find new solutions for the plants that are now all, filled with heavy metals and so on, which means export revenue, which means nutrition problems, which means sick children, etc. We have to deal with all of that, because people they started dying, but this is just the beginning. We have to respond to that. But we must also recognize that the situation that makes Galamsey possible, that actually makes it inevitable, has much more to do, it's much broader than just gold mining. Galamsey is not a problem of just bad people who are behaving in antisocial ways. It is a problem of people who society has denied any avenues for making an honest, decent living. These are desperate people who are turning to whatever they can to make a living. And desperate people will do antisocial things to survive. You look at all those mothers in these Galamsey pits, they have children to feed. You can't tell them that they should just stop. So the crisis is Galamsey, but if you look around, there's a similar crisis affecting literally every aspect of our society. And it is all linked up in the fact of our neo-colonial system. That essentially this country is run for the benefit of people outside who own large amounts of capital and who have structured industries and supply chains such that all the value we create is sucked out of this country, and there's simply not enough to meet all the needs of our people. We have to address that. And we think that the focus, the consensus, the unity that is building around Galamsey begins to give us a chance to do that. Okay? You're right that at the moment there are a number of disparate movements. Everybody from the Catholics, who seem to be more worried about political party participation than mobilizing people. But that's fine. The Catholics are making a move. At least the Accra Archdiocese is making a move. And we must respect and appreciate that. Okay? Young citizens are making a move. But I think that the game changer is when organized working people, labor unions, medical association, all the other associations begin to get together and say something must change. Because you find that these are the people who have the capacity to actually make that change. We can't solve Galamsey just by demonstrating and by shouting. Somebody has to tell us what the actual plan for recovering and restoring the destroyed lands are. Those people, the people who have that expertise, they are in our universities, etc. They must put their minds to that task. But the space must be created for them to do that. The medical repercussions, Ghana Medical Association, that's the collection of all the doctors who must tell us, okay, this is the nature of the crisis we face. These are the medical measures that are taken. This is the rebalancing of spending and so on that is going to be required to protect the health of our children. Engineers are required, okay? What are we going to do with all these diverted waterways, with all this silt that is floating down the rivers? We're going to need lawyers, okay? It's inevitable that very soon, Côte d'Ivoire, for example, will take us on. We are poisoning their rivers. We are creating a huge, siltification problem along the coast, which affects them. It will affect fishery. It will affect all sorts of other things. Okay, so we're at a point where we actually need a national mobilization. The government is the government. We respect that. We want them to play a leadership role. But it is very clear that in the circumstances, they are unable to. And therefore, we want them to open the doors so that we can sit down as a people and decide how we solve this thing together. It's not just going to be ministers announcing new measures, which frankly mean nothing, in October, 2 months before election. We know that they don't have the capacity to effect any of these things they're talking about. And we know that they're not serious about it. They're just trying to buy time. And that's, unfortunately, within our system, natural for a politician. The most important thing for politicians, unfortunately, is winning elections. And this crisis is breaking at a time that poses further difficulties for the ruling party. But the interests of ruling parties are subordinate, entirely subordinate to the interests of the wider public. And this is the time for the wider public to make that clear. So we want some emergency measures taken, and we want the space created for the resources that exist within organized labor, and perhaps even some kinds of workers who are not yet organized, to bring their focus to bear on solving a national problem. Every once in a while it happens that governments fail and citizens must take over. We are not, even at this stage, talking about a revolution. We are not talking about taking over government. We're talking about rebalancing the relationship between state agencies and organized citizens so we can actually solve problems and move forward. And if it takes the shock power of organized labor laying down its tools to focus attention, then that's a good thing. It's a good thing if that happens. It's not a good thing that that's needed, but it's a good thing if organized labor has the resolve, has the fortitude to lead in this situation. And that's what we are welcoming. We are welcoming the fact that the workers, professionals, etc. of Ghana are moving to a position where we can actually solve some problems. The process of actually solving them will be a little different from the strike and so on. And that's why we are calling for organized labor to begin to convene meetings, small meetings, big meetings, where we can discuss how we actually deal with this problem. Because calling on government, quite frankly, we've seen what government can do, and it's not very impressive. So, all shoulders to the wheel, okay? Full national mobilization to solve a national crisis. And organized labor is leading the way.
So you expect organized labor not to only look within the groups, let's say the GME among others, but also extend a hand to the other small groups that are also fighting the CSO platforms, the media coalition, put them all together into one unit, one movement led by them, and start having a conversation on our proposals towards solving this problem using the technocrats available to them?
Well, I'm not, let's be clear, I'm not saying that there should be one single, organization. A movement is a movement. It will have many different parts, many different contributors, and let's face it, many different agendas involved in there. We will not always agree on everything, but why? The people who work in CSOs, who spend their time dealing with these issues, have something to offer. They have something to say. Okay, the citizens who organize a democracy hub, why? At the very least, they force public attention onto this issue. Okay, they have something to offer. We can sit down and we can talk through how we do the broader coordination and what each individual grouping or organization has to offer. But we're not seeing one single solitary organization. We are actually talking about a movement, Yeah.
Now, having said that, let me conclude with you on a few notes. The first one is the response of the government, and someone just shared with me this latest statement from them, where they are saying government in its continued efforts to clamp down on the long-standing menace of illegal small-scale mining has concluded operational measures to intensify the ongoing Operation Halt, which is led by the Ghana Armed Forces to rid our river bodies of all forms of mining activity. This phase of the operation will be done in conjunction with the Small-Scale Miners Association of Ghana. Government reassessed that river bodies and forest reserves remain rest zones. Government reiterates its commitment to the fight against illegal small-scale mining and calls on all stakeholders to join the fight. Are those moves that we can trust?
Well, the first thing I would say is that those are moves that are being made because organized labor has threatened this move or has declared this move. That's the first point. This is happening in response to the emerging national movement. It is not government simply continuing with the process it started, 8 years ago when we were given interministerial committees and Operation Vanguard and this, that, and the other, importing drones and so on. This is not a simple continuation of that effort. That effort collapsed. It collapsed completely and was simply abandoned. Now, the state has been forced to recognize the crisis, not, in my opinion, because of the crisis itself, but because of the political repercussions that are emerging. Having said that, why? The Ghana Armed Forces are our armed forces. They have skills, they have organization, which will be important in this process. But the framing of the process and the assigning of different roles, the targeting of this process, I think at this point needs to be thought through by a wider group than cabinet. Do I trust the government to solve this problem? No. I think government will do what it needs to do to get through the next elections. And we can't afford that anymore. But are the instruments the government has instruments that we can use? Yes. Why not? We should use the Ghana Armed Forces. We should use the Ghana Police Service. We should use our hospitals. We should use our district assemblies. Nobody's saying that these institutions are illegitimate and somehow should be banished or abandoned. We're saying we need to reorganize the efforts and the framework within which we use these instruments to make things better for all of us. And that campaign cannot be subject to anybody's political or partisan agenda. Okay? Which is not also to say that the political parties can't play a role. They can. MPs depend on votes. They depend on the goodwill of constituencies. People in constituencies are concerned about this issue. They may not be certain how to move forward, but people are desperately looking for leadership. So, yes, the parties have a role, but the parties need to refocus and play that role, and not just use this as an electoral gimmick, whether ruling party or opposition. It is a real crisis. People will die if they're not already dying. It will cause hunger next year. Terrible hunger. It will cause disease. Right now, what we're doing something. I was listening to a program that now Ghana Water Company is being forced to treat the water that goes through their system as wastewater. So it's no longer about cleaning up, stream water, natural water, and trying to get rid of a few biological problems and so on. Now they're being forced to treat it in the way that you would treat wastewater. That is what we are drinking. That's what we're drinking. And that's what we have to stop. So that needs to be the center. The problems of the people needs to be the center of this campaign. And everybody else can relate to it from their different perspectives. But the central people's problem must take center. And that's what I think is addressed by a movement led by organized labor. So we certainly will do whatever it takes to help organized labor lead this. Okay? We don't think this fight can be led by parties. They can participate in it, but they can't lead it. We think organized labor is the correct grouping to take leadership in the situation we are in. And we as SMG will support that.
And so let me conclude on that note, on the note of organized labor. Already, if you look to the newspapers, there are some newspapers who are reporting cracks because of the decision of the GMA not to be part of the strike, a statement issued by their president. I'm sure you've seen that statement. Do you agree when people say that suggests that organized labor in itself is not organized?
Being organized is not the same as being 100% united. Organized labor is made up of a number of individual associations. They have their own rules and processes. I am not in a position to say whether the position of GMA is correct. I'm not even in a position to say whether the position expressed by Dr. Sribo represents what doctors want. I don't know. They must go through their processes democratically and decide what they want to do. But I think it's very clear that the majority of organizations within the organized labor framework are clear that this action is necessary. And that's good enough for me.